Hello, everyone. My name is Jasmine Stokes, as you know, and I decided to do my presentation on older adults and depression. Next, I just want to talk about what depression is, as stated by definition by psychiatry.org. Depression, major depressive disorder, is a common serious medical illness that negatively affects how you feel, the way you think, and how you act. Next, the symptoms of depression could either be mild or severe, and some of the symptoms that are listed are feeling sad or having a depressed mood, loss of interest in activities that a person may have once enjoyed, changes in appetite, weight loss, or weight gain, trouble sleeping or a person sleeps too much, loss of energy, increased fatigue, feeling worthless or guilty, difficulty thinking, concentrating, or making decisions, thoughts of death, and suicide. Depression can affect anyone. It doesn't matter their race, gender, or class, or how they live their life. And risk factors for depression are biochemistry. Then they're talking about, certain chemicals in the brain and how they interact with each other. They can contribute to depression. Genetics. So if depression runs in your family, you could have a possibility of having depression in your lifetime. Personality. People who have low self-esteem or someone who's easily overwhelmed by stress could be at risk for having depression. And environment. So, like exposure to violence, abuse, neglect, and poverty. At this age, I would imagine that people have experienced grief and loss throughout their lifetime, and it's important for people working with this population to know the difference between depression and grief and loss. So it's perfectly natural and normal for a person to go through a grieving process and be upset about someone they cared about passing away. There were certain differences between the two that a person should be able to notice when dealing with depression or grief and loss. One of those would be people usually are able to keep their they would not have low self-esteem if they were dealing with grief and loss. But in depression, that would be a sign that someone is depressed. Feelings of worthlessness and self-loathing would not be a part of grief and loss as well. So I just thought that distinguishing between those two things would be very important with this population, because as we get older, we know that not everybody that we grow up with and love and spend time with will be with us, and grief and loss are different than depression. It states that depression is one of the most treatable mental disorders currently. Usually a person would be evaluated to decide if they were suffering from depression. They would probably go over the symptoms that this person could be experiencing. They would go over their family history, their medical history, how they grew up, what kind of environment they grew up in, just to get an idea of the makeup of this person and better be able to treat them. Depression is typically treated with therapy or with therapy and medication. They listed psychotherapy, medication, and electroconvulsive therapy as treatments. So it states that 6.5 million older adults suffer from depression, and some of the causes of depression in older adults would be elder abuse, whether a person was single or in a relationship, If they were a widower, they said they had higher levels of depression. And if they were a woman, they also had higher levels of depression. And next, I just want to show a video of how some people described depression in their older age and what they went through.
And older Americans have a suicide rate that is greater than their share of the population. One reason may be that symptoms of depression in the elderly can be subtle and they are often dismissed as a normal consequence of growing old. But as Perry Peltz reports, once diagnosed, elderly depression can be relatively easy to treat.
Rosalind Auerbach says she lived for her family, raising her 2 children in Brooklyn, a marriage of 55 years, and now her greatest joy, 3 grandchildren. But at one time, Rosalind says she couldn't enjoy her family at all because she became depressed.
I wanted to say, I'm going to give up, and I don't want to live anymore. I knew how to load and unload a gun in the dark.
Phyllis, now 75 years old, says suicide was never far from her thoughts. The depression, she says, was relentless.
You feel like you're worthless, that there's nothing more for you to do. Why are you here? Why do you have to go on?
Rosalind says it felt like there was nothing left to do. Her husband died. Her children were grown. She was sick, and she felt like the next activity in her life was death.
I just was so out of it. I didn't know which way to turn.
Rosalind didn't turn for help. She just assumed the depression was just another part of aging that she would live with until she died.
Contrary to popular belief, depression is not a natural part of aging.
Not natural and very treatable if diagnosed, but diagnosis can be difficult.
Sometimes it can be tricky diagnosing depression in the elderly because very often those signs are very subtle. And if there's some early dementia and some cognitive loss, those signs in terms of diagnosing depression can be quite subtle.
Subtle, but there. Symptoms include persistent sadness, feelings of worthlessness, changes in weight, tearfulness, pacing and fidgeting, and excessive worry. The good news, depression in the elderly can be treated. But first, a doctor must rule out that medications already being taken for other ailments like diabetes and hypertension are not the cause of the depression. After that, counseling and drug therapy can make a significant improvement.
Life is worth living, and there's a lot of pleasure that one can derive in life, even in their 80s and their 90s.
Like Phyllis, who has gone back to graduate school to earn her degree in social work, and Rosalind, who enjoys copper enameling and exercise.
I put a smile on my face because when you cry alone. And that's not the way to be. You have to be out and amongst people in order to make sure that you forget yourself just a little bit.
Okay, yes, I also really enjoyed that video because it covered how dementia and Alzheimer's can also affect if someone can be diagnosed with depression and how tricky it is in this population to decide if someone is suffering from depression. So the video kind of listed about the best way to treat depression, how to address depression. So it would be good as social workers if we could know the signs of depression and be able to distinguish between depression in older adults and grief and loss and some other kind of mental impairment like dementia and Alzheimer's. So just trying to figure out what this person is going through and distinguishing if it's this, this, or this. So when working with them, a lot of older adults could have caretakers, and coordinating with them concerning their mental health would be best because sometimes these people may not be able to get to certain facilities. They may need help with transportation, may not know about forms they have to fill out for medication or the insurance company. So coordinating with a trusted caretaker would be nice. And then helping the older adult maybe deal with the fact that they could be or could have depression, because there's a stigma that can be associated with depression. and you want to address this subject with compassion and empathy and understanding of what they could be going through. Okay, so this affects social work because, as we stated in class, the baby boomer generation is growing older, and soon they will be the elders of this country, and there's a lot of them, and they could be dealing with mental health issues that maybe we are not prepared to handle because there aren't enough social workers or professionals to deal with that big a population. So it concerns me that this population is going to be, I guess, not get the same care as a baby should be getting, because there will not be enough people to be able to handle that large amount of needs that this population could have. Finally, on a micro, meso, macro level, on how we could address this issue. On a macro level, there should be more training on recognizing depression in older adults. We should know when, I guess, an older adult is going through depression, and distinguishing, like we stated before, between depression, grief and loss, and other mental impairment issues that a person could have. On a meso level, I think that facilities should try to recruit professionals into geriatric social work because, as you said, there will not be enough workers that will, in due time, there will not be enough workers to take care of this population because it's going to be so large. On a macro level, I think that there should be more research done on the mental health and how it affects the elderly, depression, anxiety, stress, all that should be researched more. And the research findings should be given out to these professionals who are working with the geriatric population. I also think that on a macro level, there should be more recruitment for professionals to do research and work with the geriatric population, because we are all going to get old. We are all probably going to need, I don't know, but we're all going to get old, and we want to be able to have the best care available for the elders in our lives currently now, and when we become an elder, we want to have the best care available to us as well. So research should be done about depression in the elderly, and it should be done so that this population does not have to suffer through depression because of misdiagnosis on social workers' part or any helping professionals' part. So, thank you. And that was my presentation on older adults and depression.